It's pretty much a universal rule of history that all great civilizations eventually die out, right? Their languages just kind of fade away, their ancient religions are forgotten, and those mighty, bustling cities, they eventually end up buried under the dust and silence of centuries. But there is one specific land that totally broke this rule, a place that literally refused to fade.
And that poses this massive, almost impossible historical mystery. How on earth did a civilization survive over 2 millennia of constant, brutal invasions? I mean, think about it. Over the past 2,500 years, the land we now call Iran was conquered by the Greeks, taken by the Arabs, overrun by the Turks, and just absolutely devastated by the Mongols. We're talking cities burned to the ground and entire dynasties wiped off the map. Yet, a civilization that historically should have just been completely absorbed wasn't. Instead, it did the exact opposite. It repeatedly absorbed its conquerors, molding their languages, their cultures, and their religions into something distinctly Iranian.
So, to make sense of this incredible survival story in today's explainer, we're going to travel through 5 key eras. First, the geographic mystery of Iran, then the rise of ancient empires, the clashes with superpowers, their stunning cultural victories and defeat, and finally, the forging of modern Iranian identity. All right, part one, the mystery of Iran and how geography is destiny. Look, long before kings and massive armies entered the picture, the whole story started with the extreme geography of the Iranian plateau. Surrounded by these incredibly harsh mountains and brutal salt deserts, it sat directly at the crossroads of the ancient world. Basically, any civilization rising up here was absolutely destined to face the currents of the entire globe. The first major unification actually happened under the Medes. They were this group of semi-nomadic tribes living up in the northwestern mountains, and they were totally fractured. That is, until a clever leader named Darius came along. He strategically built up this stellar reputation as a super fair judge, resolving all these bitter disputes between warring tribes. And then, he just abruptly stopped. He literally just went home. Without him, absolute chaos returned. The tribes quickly realized, wow, we desperately need a central authority. So they voluntarily united and crowned him king. He then built the magnificent concentric walled capital of Ecbatana, giving the Medes their very first permanent political center. Moving into part two, the rise of ancient empires, from Cyrus to the King of Kings. So while the Medes were at the absolute peak of their power, a young Persian prince named Cyrus was quietly, patiently observing their weaknesses. Around 550 BCE, he launched a surprisingly swift rebellion, and the Median Empire essentially collapsed from within. But Cyrus did something incredibly unusual for the ancient world. He didn't destroy the Medes, he absorbed them. He then went on to capture the insanely wealthy kingdom of Lydia and the supposedly impregnable walls of Babylon. But get this, he didn't enter Babylon as a conqueror. He rolled in as a liberator. He issued the famous Cyrus Cylinder, granting unprecedented religious freedom and allowing exiled peoples, including the Jews, to return to their homelands. By the time he died, the guy had built the largest empire in history, stretching all the way from the Aegean Sea to Central Asia. Now, you might be wondering, how do you even manage a superpower that massive? Well, Darius the Great stepped up and brilliantly organized the whole thing. He divided the empire into 20 provinces, called satrapies, but he kept them in check with royal inspectors who reported straight back to him. He built the Royal Road, a staggering 2,700-kilometer highway. He even introduced a standard gold coin called the Daric, standardizing weights and measures so a merchant way out in Anatolia could seamlessly trade with someone in Central Asia. And to project sheer power, he built the magnificent ceremonial capital of Persepolis and literally carved his legitimacy into a mountain with a massive 3-language Behistun inscription. Which brings us to part 3, the clash of superpowers featuring Alexander and Rome. So the Persian Empire was this incredibly well-oiled machine, but its western edges eventually collided hard with mainland Greece. Sparked by the Ionian Revolt, Persian kings Darius and later his son Xerxes sent these massive invasion forces westward. But the Greeks, they cleverly used strategic terrain to check the overwhelming Persian numbers. At Marathon, heavy Greek infantry totally routed the Persian flanks. At the incredibly narrow pass of Thermopylae, King Leonidas and his 300 Spartans stalled the entire Persian army. And at Salamis, the massive Persian fleet was lured into a narrow strait and utterly destroyed. After that, Persia never attempted to invade Greece again. Decades later, though, the tide completely turned. A young Macedonian king named Alexander the Great marched east with a highly disciplined army. He totally shattered the Achaemenid Empire, and in a moment of utter military defeat for Persia, burned down the magnificent capital of Persepolis. But notice the transformation that happens next. This is actually the first major instance of the Iranian Phoenix arc. Alexander destroyed the empire, sure, but the deeper he marched into Iran, the more he was absorbed by its culture. He started wearing Persian royal dress, he married a Bactrian princess, and he adopted Persian court rituals. The conqueror was slowly but surely being conquered by the culture he had just defeated. After Alexander died, his empire totally fragmented, but Iranian identity quietly survived out in the countryside. And soon enough, new native powers rose up. First, the nomadic Parthians swept in from the northeast. Later on, the highly centralized, heavily Zoroastrian Sassanian Empire took control. For centuries, these two dynasties provided a fierce, continuous, deadlocked resistance against the mighty Roman and Byzantine empires in the West. Just to give you a clear idea of exactly how effective this resistance was, let's take a quick look at the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BCE. The incredibly wealthy Roman politician Crassus marched 40,000 highly disciplined Roman legionaries straight into the desert, fully expecting an easy victory. Big mistake. The Parthians used camel caravans to continuously resupply their horse archers with an endless rain of arrows. And whenever the Romans actually tried to attack, the Parthian cavalry would retreat and fire arrows backward over their shoulders at full gallop, the legendary Parthian shot. Crassus was killed, and Rome suffered one of the absolute most humiliating defeats in its entire history.
All right, part 4, cultural victory and defeat, the arrival of the Arabs, Turks, and Mongols.
So, after centuries of draining wars, the Sasanian Empire was finally toppled by newly united Arab Muslim armies. Now, this conquest brought a new government and a new faith, Islam. However, under the early Umayyad Caliphate, Iranian converts were treated as mawali, basically second-class citizens who were heavily taxed and kept strictly below Arab Muslims in social status. As you can imagine, this intense inequality sparked deep, deep resentment. Eventually, an Iranian general named Abu Muslim helped lead the massive Abbasid revolution. They completely overthrew the Umayyads and shifted the Islamic capital to Baghdad, literally right next door to the old Persian center. What followed was, quite frankly, an absolute Persian renaissance. Iran had lost its political independence, yes, but Iranian administrators and scholars essentially conquered the entire Islamic world from the inside out. Persian bureaucrats ran the vast Abbasid government. Culturally, the poet Ferdowsi spent 30 years writing the epic Shahnameh just to revive and cement the Persian language. You had brilliant Iranian minds like Ibn Sina authoring medical texts that Europe would use for centuries, while al-Biruni accurately calculated the Earth's circumference. Persia was politically defeated, but culturally, they were winning again. But then came the ultimate test of survival, the Mongols. In the 13th century, Genghis Khan unleashed total annihilation on the Iranian plateau. Millions were slaughtered. Magnificent cities like Merv and Nishapur were burned to ash. They even destroyed the critical Qanat underground irrigation systems, turning once fertile lands into literal deserts. It was a civilization-level catastrophe. And yet, the Phoenix Arc happened again. No way, right? But it did. Genghis Khan's grandson established the Mongol Ilkhanate in Persia, and over just a few generations, these ruthless conquerors converted to Islam, heavily sponsored Persian art, and put Persian administrators right back in charge. It was the ultimate assimilation. Which brings us to our final era, Part 5, Forging Modern Iranian Identity. From the Safavids to the Revolution. The real turning point for modern Iran arrived in the early 16th century, and it all started with a 14-year-old boy named Ismail. Supported by fiercely loyal warriors, he captured Tabriz, declared himself Shah, and made an incredibly radical decision. Twelver Shia Islam would become the official state religion of a majority Sunni nation. This was a game changer. It permanently separated Iran's identity from the powerful Sunni Ottoman Empire to the west and the Central Asian states to the east. And that deeply forged alliance between Shia clergy and political power, that became a permanent fixture of Iranian identity. Skipping ahead a bit to the modern era, Iran found itself totally squeezed in the great game between Russian and British influence. In 1925, a military officer named Reza Shah founded the Pahlavi dynasty, launching this era of aggressive modernization. Later on, oil became the massive, highly contested prize.
In 1951, Prime Minister Mossadegh nationalized Iran's oil industry, but a UK and US-backed coup removed him in 1953, fully restoring the Shah's absolute power. This foreign interference deeply eroded the monarchy's legitimacy, planting the direct seeds for modern unrest. See, the Shah used immense oil wealth to rapidly modernize the cities, but this created some really severe economic inequality. To maintain control, the state relied on a brutal secret police force, Savak, violently suppressing any political opposition. Eventually, all that frustration just boiled over. Really diverse groups, we're talking students, workers, intellectuals, and religious scholars, they all remarkably united under the exiled cleric Ayatollah Khomeini. In 1979, the 2,500-year-old tradition of Iranian monarchy finally collapsed, and it was replaced by a theocratic Islamic Republic. The political and religious authorities had officially merged. So let's take a step back. Over 25 centuries, through the Greeks, the Arabs, the Turks, and the Mongols, through massive empires, total collapses, and modern revolutions, the core of Iranian civilization survived. Instead of shuddering, it absorbed its conquerors, completely transforming them from the inside out. And it really makes you wonder. Empires and dynasties, they come and go, right? They're born, and they inevitably fall. But if absorbing your conquerors is the absolute ultimate form of victory, can a civilization that continuously adapts ever truly be destroyed?